Okay, recording in progress. Okay, so it's my pleasure today to introduce to you Reverend Erin Davis. She began practicing at the Missouri Zen Center in 2008 and attended her first Great Sky session at Hokkyoji in 2009. She received Jukai from Dr. Rosan Yoshida Roshi in 2010 and ordination from him in 2019. She practiced at Shogoji in Kyushu, and she currently resides in the arid shrub steppe of Eastern Washington. Am I saying that right? Steppe? It's steppe, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I had to look it up if it was steep or steppe. I've seen the word many times, but I just haven't heard it pronounced many times. So,
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to say a couple words first, my own little Dharma speech for like no more than 2 minutes, but I'm very happy. First, let me just really, I see that Dr. Rosan Osamu Roshi is with us today. So really, thank you so much, Rosan, for joining us today. Rosan is kind of my Dharma brother, but I think he's a little more elder than me on the scale of things. So I hesitate to call him my brother. So he's kind of like, anyway, I'm going to talk just for a couple of seconds that about Erin's name. And of course, Rosan Yoshida Roshi, I've noticed he has this pattern of trying to take the sound of the English name and make it into a Japanese Dharma name. And I've not known any other Zen teacher to do this in the way that Yoshida Roshi does. So I think in Erin's case, it was pretty easy. And so, but what I'm saying is that Katagiri Roshi would talk about the soul Rien, and he really went on to lengthen that at Hokkyoji because my understanding is soul means community and the Rien means the forest. So it's the community in the forest. That's my understanding of that. And I don't remember exactly what the A part is of Erin, but I think the Rin means the forest. So Dr. Yoshida Roshi, would you like to just say a word about that, what the A is? I'm putting him on the spot here. Or you want to say Erin?
I can't. It looks like he disappeared. I wonder if he
He
hit
did.
the wrong button. Uh-oh.
Maybe he hit the
he
wrong
went-
button,
he-
like
he went
end,
away.
like end this right now. So
Oh, there he is.
There he is.
okay. Do you want to say? Are you there, Roshan? I can't see you on the screen. But...
Yeah, he's there.
Yeah, sometimes his audio, it acts up.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear us okay, or?
Yeah, I don't think it is. Rosan?
Roshan, maybe you're muted.
Yeah, it looks, sometimes there are mic problems. I wonder. Can you hear us okay?
Yoshida
Maybe
Roshi, Yoshida Roshi, can you hear us? I'm asking you to explain that the A in Erin, but you have to unmute. But if we're not,
Yeah, I'm wondering. There might be a technical.
okay. Oh, well,
I think he is unmuted.
Yeah, sometimes his audio connection causes problems in some of our meetings, and I'm wondering if that's
okay.
but
Well, we'll move on.
yeah. Oh, the
So,
A is apparently means a wisdom. So wisdom
okay,
forest.
wisdom in the forest. Okay, that's really great. Okay, all right. In any event, we're happy to have you here today with us, Erin. And I believe that the title of your talk is called The State of Peace. So we are waiting to hear what you would like to say about that. So thank you so much for joining us today and being our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I was listening to Jodo Cliff Clusen's lecture that he gave, I guess a few weeks ago. I was traveling, and so I had to miss it. So I went back, and I like to listen to him. And he started out by saying he was going to talk about the oh gosh, what did he say here? It's Flowers in the Sky, that fascicle of Shobogenzo. And he noticed that in Kikan's transcriptions of Katagiri Roshi's talks, he spoke on it. So he went and listened to them. And he said, well, the first hour and a half lecture was just on the title. And then he went through 4 lectures and he got about a third of a page in. And he said, and he was kind of laughing at that style of kind of very slowly working through a text and versus, kind of looking at a text at one time and talking about it. And I just thought that was really interesting. And I got a little uncomfortable because today I'm going to talk about just a little tiny part of the Metta Sutta. And last time I talked, there's a commentarial story that sort of is what prompted the delivery of the Metta Sutta. And so today I'm just going to look at the very first, that the state of peace is from the first line of the translation we're using. And so I'm not going to get very far either, I'm afraid, but that's where I'll start. Just as a recap of that commentarial story, there is a group of monks who were during the rainy season going to find a place to meditate, and they found a beautiful spot, but the tree spirits of the area were kind of concerned that they were going to stay there, and so started to kind of harass them to make them go away, and it was upsetting to them. So they went to talk to the Buddha about it, and he gave them this text, and it's supposed to be a protection discourse, but also a meditation subject. And it's Brahma Viharas, one of the divine abodes. Metta gets translated as loving kindness. Also, goodwill, I've heard, is a good translation of that word. It's related to the Pali word mita, which means friend. So there's kind of this idea of friendship or friendliness behind it. And so I'm gonna look at part of that text. And before I do, I guess another theme that I've kind of in parallel been thinking about as I'm reading this text is it's a kind of a Theravada text. I mean, it doesn't just for various historical reasons doesn't get used very much in, for example, in Japanese Zen. my understanding is that that had to do in a large part just what texts were available, what translations were available, and so on. But it's something I've been thinking of in that, because now here in the States, so many texts are available and more English translations are becoming available, sort of what happens in that case. And because I've been thinking about it for a while, I actually came across a little paragraph. I have this notebook where when I'm reading things that I think is interesting, I kind of write them down. And so I wrote this down kind of at the beginning, as a matter of fact. And it was from an article by Isho Fujita, and who's been to Hokyoji before. And so that was kind of interesting. And in the context of this article, so he's looking in this article, it's from the Insight Journal, the Bar Center for Buddhist Studies, fall 2000. He's looking at a particular Pali Sutta, and he's ruminating on that just a little bit, that topic of sort of the various texts available now. And he said in that context, I'll quote him here, many of the early Chinese masters wanted to understand the original teachings of the Buddha, but since they could not read Sanskrit or Pali, it was very difficult to do so. Instead, and of course there are many translations there, but I suppose the early times, instead they tried to connect with the mind of the Buddha through meditation. Dogen said that he was teaching Zen, but what he was transmitting was the Buddha Dharma. He had this faith that what he had understood through his practice was directly from the Buddha mind. Scholars may object to this kind of transmission, but it was Dogen's faith. And in religious understanding, faith matters a lot. So I thought that was just kind of interesting there. But anyway, so I'm going to look at this text that was originally in Pali. The translation that I've been using is in Christina Feldman's text, The Boundless Heart on the Four Brahmaviharas. And so the very first phrase is to reach the state of peace. I'm wondering, I think I might just go ahead and just read the whole thing through again, just to kind of remind us. It sort of looks at the, encourages practice of the sort of the three learnings. So there's sort of right conduct, and then there's concentration and wisdom, those three. And I guess it divides itself along those lines, but I'll just read the whole thing. So to reach the state of peace, one skilled in the good should be capable and upright, easy to speak to and straightforward, of gentle nature and not proud, contented and easily supported, living lightly and having few duties, wise and with senses calmed, not arrogant and without greed for supporters, and should not do the least thing that the wise would reproach them for. One should reflect in this way: may all beings be happy and secure. May all beings be happy-minded. Whatever living beings there may be, whether weak or strong, tall, large, medium, or short, small or big, seen or unseen, near or distant, born or to be born, may they without exception all be happy-minded. Let no one despise another or deceive anyone anywhere. Let no one through anger or hatred wish for another's suffering. As a mother would risk her own life to protect her child, her only child, so for all beings one should guard one's boundless heart. With boundless friendliness for the whole world should one cultivate a boundless heart in all directions, without obstruction, without hate, and without ill will. Standing or walking, sitting or lying down, whenever one is awake, may one stay with this recollection. This is called the best and most sublime way of dwelling in this world. One who is virtuous, endowed with insight, not clinging to wrong view, and having overcome all passion for sensual pleasure, will not come to lie in a womb again. Okay, so that's the text. And so I thought, just really briefly, there is a commentary, Bhikkhu Bodhi's commentary, and he goes line by line. So it's just kind of funny. The text of the translation that appears in this work begins, "This is what should be done by one skilled in the good, having made the breakthrough through that peaceful state." So this idea of peace appears a little bit later in this text. So the commentary looks at other parts, but then when it gets to the peaceful state. So there's a little gloss on peaceful states in accusative form. And so I don't know Pali, and that's another theme I've been thinking of, to what extent does one need to know languages? But I know a little Latin, and an accusative, two nouns, there's a verb. So the first noun has sort of a relationship with that second noun, acts on it, it's a direct object. It is peaceful through its characteristic and a state because it should be attained. This is a designation for nibbana. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. So the word used, I guess, is santa. I asked Dr. Yoshida about it, and he did study Pali when he was getting his doctorate. So it's a very good person to ask. But I guess it's sort of it's a designation for that state of nibbana, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I think I naturally incline toward grammar. And so I have some ideas about these sort of subject and object relationship, but I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to leave it alone and say this idea of peace. What is it? Let's look at peace. And so I did want to take just a little minute to talk about, I don't think I ever have with the folks at Hokyoji. I just sort of showed up and, here I am. But just how I sort of came to Buddhism. And I was kind of going back. I recently went through some of my papers associated with the move, so I could look at them. And I was reminded that in about 2005 or 6, I have an uncle. He's a chemical engineer. And he sent me this paper on peak oil. And I don't know if probably some of you are familiar with that idea, but it's just this idea, oil, sort of in very recent history, great quantities of this became available and sort of changed the nature of our society very dramatically. And like any finite resource, at some point, we don't know when, at some point it could become, the easy pickings go first. It's very easy to get the easy stuff. But as time goes on, it becomes a little bit more challenging to get to oil and more environmentally destructive, probably more invasive processes to get at, it's not quite so easy. And corresponding with this idea of right at about the time that more and more people want access to the benefits that one can have through this, there's this idea of resource scarcity. I mean, it's just, I don't know, I guess it's kind of a new idea to me. And I read about it for quite a while and got actually pretty depressed, like really depressed. Just sort of running the models of what happens in such a context, and of course wars and all the rest of it. So I was kind of in that state. Can I learn biofuel? Just what can be done and so on. In this case, so one of the things I did as I was kind of working through this is I worked at a university in St. Louis, and part of that the university has a medical school, and it just so happened that at the time, this is about 2007, they had this study, a medical study on calorie restriction, and so I signed up, and so this is called calorie, which I guess there's a reason they spelled it that way, but and I threw out I had a whole raft of papers, but I kept, they measured everything. They were always taking blood samples and so on. So I just kept it, and or parts of it. And so just the idea of, okay, research, let's think about this idea of resource scarcity. And the thing that I felt I could kind of do is explore that idea of living with less, right? How does that look? And so I found when they first, they do run many tests, and they do a psychological evaluation and all the rest of it. And one of the things in my session, they ask you, why did you join Calorie? And I put down, I had come across a description of Biosphere 2 some years ago, and I'd forgotten about that, so I had to look that up. But when I heard calls for participation for this study twice, I was intrigued and decided to make an appointment to learn more. What do you hope to achieve by taking part in Calorie, this study? And I like the idea of living lightly on the planet. Also, I'm getting middle-aged. This is more than 10 years ago, so I want to think about this, but anyway. And need to think a little bit more about my health maintenance. I hope to learn more about diet and healthy eating, and then they ask more questions. And so it was just kind of interesting. This is before I really had sort of entered into Buddhism at all, but just a little bit later, I did sort of, it was almost kind of naive. I was thinking, well, Buddhists, you have this idea that they live modestly, right? And a lot of religious traditions too, but in Buddhism, there's this idea of, simplicity and living modestly, and counteracting greed and these things. So anyway, so I just Googled and found the Missouri Zen Center and went there, and I started attending sessions there, learned how to meditate. And it was kind of interesting doing both of those at the same time. One of the things that, they always say Buddhism, Zen is a very embodied, sort of practice. And I think doing the calorie restriction, this is a medical study, so it's kind of calorie restriction light. I mean, they needed people who could, this is a 2-year study, and they needed people, it couldn't be very extreme, so it was, but just enough to sort of, in any event. So I was doing that, and I was learning to meditate, and one of the big things I kind of noticed was that it's a lot easier to do something. So with calorie restriction, the idea is you don't, the focus of the study wasn't, how exercise and whatever impacts. It was very much a sort of, reduce your calorie consumption. And so it was very focused on sort of, it felt like sitting, you feel like there's this urge to get up and like do so. So both of those were sort of focused on this idea of not doing things. And I found that was just an awful lot harder to do than I had realized. So that's one thing that I kind of took with me. So in any event, so there I'm at the Missouri Zen Center. So I met with Dr. Yoshida, who, as it happens, has, of course, a direct experience with war. He was in Japan as a child during the war, and hasn't kind of talked an awful lot about that direct experience, but of course it's there. And looking around the room, I see there are others in this group who also have direct experience with war. But so it kind of felt like an interesting connection there. And of course, Dr. Yoshida is, if you've read any of his blog pieces or listened to his lectures, of course, he talks about war a lot, and very anti-war, and, wake up, and we have to can't be doing this. And recently, I worked editing a book that he is writing about doing a paradigm shift in the way we think, changing from ego to eco, more ecologically oriented, and some very sort of practical ways of kind of addressing some of those problems. So I've been kind of swimming in those waters for a little while. But one of his, and I see from the clock I'm going to go over just a little bit, so I'll try not to go over too much. But I'll plow ahead for a little bit. So as one of his recent talks, he had sort of mentioned this story from the Buddha's time where the Buddha's country was about to be attacked by a neighboring king, and the Buddha, tried to negotiate with the king a little bit, but ultimately the king decided to go to war on his kingdom, and what the Buddha did was he was sitting under a dead tree, and the king saw him and was kind of moved to not attack. But this happened 3 times, and ultimately, I think the Buddha said, the karma here is too strong, and so he just stood by while his country was attacked. And I guess I'd heard that story before. I've been kind of, I think in one of Tim's talks, actually, he brought up this idea of stories, and it really got me thinking about stories and how they kind of act on us. And usually there's this element that's just a little bit kind of unusual, something that kind of makes you stop and say, wait, what? And this idea of sitting under a dead tree was that for me. I thought, wow, that's, and why did the king, what impact, what's going on in that story? And so I was kind of Googling a little bit and trying to, where did the story come from and more about it. And I actually found, it was kind of interesting. There's Alan Sanoke, I don't know how to pronounce his name, I'm afraid. He's at Berkeley. Okay. He quoted this story that Katagiri had told in his book, Returning to Silence, which I'd read before, but I just had forgotten that story was in there. So I went back and read it, and I'd like to quote from that story here. And these are from Katagiri Roshi's talks, and I'm almost kind of wondering if some of you maybe were there when, I don't know, when he gave this story, I don't know. But anyway, and the title is Peace. So the sectional titles is Peace. So anyway, I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read part of it. He says, there's a beautiful story about Shakyamuni Buddha that I cannot forget. I think of this story whenever I look at the human world and see the necessity for finding a way to live in peace and harmony with all sentient beings. There was once a time in India, long ago, when diplomatic relations were going well between the neighboring countries of Magadha and Kapilavatthu, where Shakyamuni Buddha and his people, the Shakya clan, lived. In those days, it was the custom for nobility to marry only nobility. So the king of Magadha asked the king of Kapilavatthu to send a princess to marry his son. The king of Kapilavatthu sent a woman to Magadha as he had promised, but rather than a woman of noble birth, he sent a housemaid. Not knowing this, the king of Magadha went ahead and celebrated the wedding. Later, when the prince took over his father's position, so the king married this housemaid and had a son who was the prince, and when the prince became king. So when the prince took over his father's position and became king, someone told him of this scandal and he became very angry. He wanted to attack Kapilavatthu at any cost. When the Shakya people realized that the king of Magadha was planning to attack them, they asked Shakyamuni Buddha to stop him, and he accepted the task. Even though the Buddha was an expert in using weapons and was well trained in the martial arts, he didn't fight. Instead, he tried to negotiate with the king in many ways. However, there was one person near the king who persistently encouraged him to fight and destroy the Shakya clan. So the king couldn't hear the Buddha. Inside of his mind, he wouldn't stop burning, and finally he decided to attack. Shakyamuni Buddha knew that the king and his army were coming, so he sat in zazen under a dead tree on the side of the road leading to Kapilavatthu. As the king traveled along this road with his army, he saw Shakyamuni Buddha sitting under a dead tree. Since it was very hot, he couldn't understand why the Buddha was sitting under a dead tree. Usually people sit under beautiful green trees. So the king asked, "Why do you sit under the dead tree?" The Buddha calmly said to the king, "I feel cool even under this dead tree because it's growing near my native country." This really pierced the king's heart, and he was so greatly impressed by the message of the Buddha's action that he could go no further. Instead of attacking, he returned to his country. But the king's attendant still continued to encourage him to attack, and finally he did so. This time, unfortunately, Shakyamuni Buddha didn't have time to do anything. Without saying a word, he just stood and watched his country and his people being destroyed. So, and then at this point, Katagiri Roshi reflects on this story a little bit. And I'll read, I won't read the whole thing, I'll read parts of it, but I sort of wanted to reflect for just a minute too. I guess, well, first of all, this story, like I said, it took me a while to find it. It's actually a commentarial story on the Dhammapada, and I guess it's ascribed to Buddha Ghosha, so it's a really very, very, very long commentary, and the story itself on just one verse in the Dhammapada is also very short. So I read that, and it turns out that the story is not 100% historically accurate, as is, I guess, often the case. And there's sort of a focus on more one angle. I mean, I think the bones of the story are mostly correct, but the idea of the war starting and the retaliation for this maybe was a little exaggerated. And the idea might be more that just, these kingdoms were always trying to get more land and so on. So, but in any event, but I guess it just sort of entering into the story as it's presented, I kind of wondered why this king, first of all, was stopped by this action of the Buddha, but then why also he ultimately decided to go ahead and attack. And Katagiri Roshi points out there is an advisor kind of pulling him in, and I've seen reference that the karma was too strong, and I think the karma that's referred to in some of the other commentaries I read suggests that the Shakya clan's karma was too strong, and so that maybe needed to be some sort of, I don't know, cause effect sort of. I don't know. For me, it feels like the karma is a larger picture. There's this system of war that, the nature of neighboring kingdoms, a response when you've been essentially humiliated by a neighboring king. I mean, this whole system was just too strong, and he couldn't kind of step outside of it, and so just was drawn to the appropriate response in the concept of war is to of course go to war. So but it did remind me this idea of systems. I was reading up a little bit on caste, the idea of caste at the Buddhist time, and was reminded of the story of Upali, So Upali was a barber, not one of the very top castes. And he was accompanying some Shakyan princes who were about to ordain with the Buddha, become part of his community. And he was supposed to sort of accompany them, and then they were going to leave all their very rich clothing and jewels and so on, and he would take them back. And apparently he thought, this isn't going to look good if I go back with all these jewels. People are going to think I, killed these princes. So he asked to be ordained also. And it turned out he was ordained before the Shakyan princes. And so in the schema and the system of Buddha's community, the idea of your status is linked to when you enter the community. And you're outside of the sort of caste system of the lay society. And so I was just kind of reading this article on Buddhism and the caste system. And it just pointed out that there was another class, I guess, or a couple that was outside of the social system into which laymen were organized. And one of them are the bhikshus of Buddhists. And then some others, they had renounced the lay life for good. They were a class sui generis, not bound by the caste restrictions, and they commanded respect from all lay social groups. So just this idea that there is this other system. And I think that kind of made an impression on me, the idea that, you don't have to, play by the rules of one system. There are other systems. And of course, other systems can also be, become problematic. But just the idea that a different system can exist, I mean, there is another way, I think sort of made me feel like, oh, well, okay, so, let's be creative here. Let's think about, there are just knowing, no, this isn't the given. You can step out of this thing. So that was helpful. But so I'll just finish by reading Katagiri's reflection on this. I'll just quote a couple of things. He says there are two important parts to this story. The first point is that real peace is not a matter of discussion. And he goes on and talks about this idea of we make ideas and then finally we fight about our ideas and so on. He says, even though the Buddha didn't say anything by his actions of sitting under a tree, which Katagiri Roshi sees as real peace, the king was very impressed because Shakyamuni Buddha manifested himself as real peace beyond any discussion of it. And then a little bit later, the second approach, the second point of the story is no matter how long we emphasize the need for real peace, there are still many individuals who don't accept our peace. So just the recognition, the way people are, I guess the three poisonous, greed, hatred, ignorance. I mean, they might not accept this idea of peace, he says. And he talks about it a little bit. And then he says to approach real peace requires a very strong, stable spiritual commitment, a vow. Just take a vow, make a commitment toward real peace, just like the Buddha sitting under the dead tree. But remember, even though we do make a commitment toward real peace, there will be many individuals who don't accept our way. So finally, where can real peace be found with us? We ourselves must remain with peace. This is pretty hard, but we cannot stop. The Buddha has to continue to sit under the dead tree. This is our sitting. So I thought that was pretty sad. I guess I'll just finish by that gesture that it's kind of interesting. Buddha sat under a dead tree. He also, it's I hate to say it's like a poem, but it's it doesn't use words. Obviously, it's an action, and it's a being, a real thing. It's not a representation. It's the real thing. He also held up a flower, right? I mean, there's the very famous story of him holding up a flower. So, and it just got me thinking that, the Metta Sutta is about, the mind state you want to be in when you do your practice and cultivating a certain mind state. And I'm thinking, grief and despair versus, a flower. And, just, it takes practice to cultivate a particular mind state. And I want a living tree. I want, to cultivate a living tree, not a dead tree. So anyway, that's no answers, just a rumination. I'll stop. So anyway, thank you.
Any comments or questions for Erin today? Well, then I'll make one. This story came up at Hokyoji maybe 2 or 3 years ago during a compassionate ocean retreat. And we were studying the book, a book by Norman Fisher. And I'm not going to be able to recreate the title, but in the beginning part of the book, we were reading about some Jewish people in a concentration camp. I don't know if they're all men or what, but Norman was telling this story, and he conceded that he didn't know if it was totally factual or not. But in any event, the men knew they were on their way to their death in a gas chamber, something like that. And as they were in this line, somebody, and I'm really paraphrasing the story because I haven't read it for 3 or 4 years, but someone in the line said, "How are you doing today?" And someone else said, "Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I'm doing really well." But they all knew they were headed toward their death, and somehow that caught on to the whole line of people. And they just all started laughing and said, "Yeah, this is a really, really great day." And eventually the German soldiers said, "We can't do this." These men are all laughing, or people are all laughing and having a good time. And so they stopped doing whatever they were doing. That's the story according to Norman Fisher. And when we were reading that story, it occurred to me, this is exactly the same story of Buddha sitting under a dead tree. It's like there's totally no sense to it. It's like, if you examine the story, it's totally illogical. He's sitting under a dead tree. The sun is shining down on him and it's burning hot. And he's sitting there. And then the prince who had become king says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm just sitting here feeling very cool in the place where I was raised." So it made no sense. but somehow there was a connection. Something happened that connected people across those boundaries or those barriers that we have with each other. And that's what I felt the same thing with this story that Norman Fisher was relating in his book. It made no sense for these men to start saying, "How are you doing today?" "I'm feeling just great." And then it leads on. Finally, they're not executed on that day. Maybe they were later. I don't know. But anyway, so that story really moves me, Erin, how we find peace and exemplify it in basically in our bodies. I think our bodies, not so much kind of some intellectual process or conceptual process by which we try to convey peace to other people. So thank you for bringing that story up again. It's very meaningful to me. So that's my comment, and I'll invoke others to say more if they wish.
He did that some other times when he was being attacked. If it might be myth or whatever, but one time an elephant was released, his cousin or somebody to kill him, and the elephant stopped. Just because of his emanation of peace. It actually is a very positive thing that does work. Not at all times. Some people are just, like you said, during that war, they just ended up attacking, but it did for a bit. And you don't know what the benefit of that short time span was. We wouldn't know. There's no telling. Escape, preparation, you don't know.
Thank you. I see Kikon.
Just a little speculation or thought that occurred to me as you were telling that story, Erin, and Dokai was telling the Katakuri Roshi, he was telling the Norman Fisher story. Katakuri Roshi, I've noticed in several of his talks about peace and harmony. And I get the impression that peace and harmony are like pretty closely related. Harmony is maybe kind of the more dynamic, interactive kind of aspect of it, is the impression I got. So in these stories, I wonder, I certainly could have been peace that was involved. The people were, I'm petting a cat. It could have been peace. Maybe, the people were impressed by the peace, but I wonder if it could have been also harmony. They felt like a connection, a human connection in that moment. And they just, that broke them out of the trance of their, individual or, group selves. And they just couldn't go through with the crazy thing that they were about to do. But then, of course, the crazy thing came back later, possibly.
Yeah.
So just my thought on the subject. Thank you for your talk.
Yes.
It's kind of interesting because, like I said, I kind of incline toward grammatical questions, and I got hung up for quite a while. This idea of what's the difference between peace and tranquility. And to me, tranquility feels more internal and peace is external. But of course, there's a connection, and harmony kind of gets at that, I think. I did notice that in the book, the section right before that was serenity and tranquility. And in that, Katagiri Roshi does take a more sort of more psychologically oriented approach and then the peace is right after. So I again, it's something I've kind of been thinking, yeah, what is the relationship of all those things? And I mean, they seem interconnected, but our language makes a distinction. And, I just, it was kind of interesting to me too.
Hi, Erin. Thank you so much for kind of taking us down the path of your and your thinking in your talk. One of the things that really struck me was when you said, I don't want to sit under a dead tree. And it reminded me of something that I've been working with in my own practice, which is this whole issue of wanting and how deeply it goes. It just seems unimaginable that somehow you can not want peace and still have that be an act of peace. For myself, it's really trying to penetrate this sense of completely being free of wanting or rejecting that world of dichotomy or duality, and how unimaginable it is. And every now and then I have an experience and I realize, oh, there was not duality in that experience. And so I thank you that kind of like the sitting under the dead tree, there's something rather dramatic about just sitting.
Dr. Yoshida?
Does my microphone work?
You can hear you. We can hear you.
All right. I think, yeah, Erin's reference to this story is very appropriate, because the essence of the story is that the tree of relatives are cooler or better. That means friendship, metta, friendship in this metta, Karaniya Metta Sutta. We must, Karaniya means we must do this friendship. If we have really friendship, there'll be no war. Actually, in this sutta, it said friendship all over the world. If we become relatives, we have real friendship, there will be no war. There will be a true peace. So Buddha's message is really actually, and all other universal religions tell this. Mitra in Sanskrit or Pali means friend, and Mitra or Misraism, Maitreya in the future Buddha saving the world, and like Messiah, Mashiach, Mazda, all I think means friendship. So future savior is friend, true friend in need. And actually, I think this is telling that it's not the future other person, other God or Buddha, but actually all of us. That is potential of all of us. We can become friends in need. If we all become friends in need, then there will be no problem, no suffering, no wars, and all beings are saved. And this is the message, I think, that the Buddha wanted to send to this king, but not only this king, but all of us, I think. By the way, the Pali language, state of peace is Santa Pada. Santa is the word same as Shanti. Indian people often say Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. That means quietude, quietness. When our mind and body storming stops, the whole world becomes quiet and peaceful and harmonious. Pada means like English pad or pedestal. You sit, you stay on that pedestal in peace. When we sit in peace, then there is the peace and harmony all over the world. So it's not peace in the world without war, but more our own state of mind and body. And that's a real point Buddhism tells. See, we want to keep peace by all the mechanisms, institutions, laws, but unless we become peaceful, we become quiet, like sitting on this pedestal, like the Buddha, we won't have real peace and harmony and joy. So it's also like, we Buddhists say Eightfold Path, Holy Path. That is also Marga, way, but also it's called Patipada, step by step procedure. So it means practice. When we sit, then really we make ourselves and the world peaceful.
Thank you, everyone. I think we're about at our closing time.
Yeah.
So why don't we, I'll close with, thank you so much for your comments today, everyone, and also Erin for your talk. Next week's speaker is Byakuran Judith Ragier, and she will speak on untangling karma. That's the title of her talk. Upcoming events, well, tomorrow we have a retreat beginning at Hokyoji, but registration is closed for that event. So then on August 5th, we have a community, family community weekend. You can register through Hokyoji if you'd like to come. It's more for families, kids, just pretty informal get together. And then on August 13th, we have a Hokyoji's Jewel Mirror session, which is being led by Daigaku Rume, Reiren Gumbo, and myself. As always, we appreciate donations. You can find a place to donate to Okyoji should you choose to do so. And this is a little hard thing for me to say, but we have to ask you to please like us on social media. so that's just the way it is these days. Yeah. So
We'll do it.
oh really? Please like me. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So why don't we close now with the 4 vowels, and I will lead them, and then we'll. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Okay, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Erin. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you, Erin.
Yeah.